The invasion of Parihaka in 1881 is a painful chapter in Aotearoa's history.
There were 1,299,000 acres that were taken from mana whenua, and these are our 3 small slices of that land.
Now in his memoir, writer Richard Shaw delves into his family's past, revealing some home truths.
People's land was stolen, and my great-grandfather was a beneficiary of that process.
One of the real benefits of having this come out now is that we're able to engage in it in a much more in-depth way than we ever were in the past.
The unsettling facts behind a settler family story.
I could avoid knowing anything about any of it for 55 years. To me, that's what Pākehā privilege looks like. It's right, there it is, right there. So this is Parihaka A. That's the section of the farm that my great-grandmother bought.
Politics professor Richard Shaw has spent hours poring over official colonial documents and material to research his family's history, to write his book, The Forgotten Coast.
Oh, here it is. Okay, so it runs down here. We see the best of ourselves on the Western Front, 20,000 kilometres away. We don't see the best of ourselves here in our own wars.
He's uncovered some painful truths about his family's involvement in the Parihaka invasion, where 1,600 troops invaded the peaceful settlement. Among them, Shaw's great-grandfather, Andrew Gilhooly.
I grew up with a photo on my parents' wall of Andrew Gilhooly, who was the captain of the Armed Constabulary rugby team. I'm 58 years old and I grew up with that photo, and it never occurred to me to ask who this man was, why so little was spoken of him and known of him in my family.
Gilhooly escaped British colonialism, immigrating from Ireland to become a Taranaki farmer, and joined the Armed Constabulary, the force behind the invasion into Parihaka Pā on November 5th, 1881.
Which farm was that on?
That was on the one on the coast side.
Shaw learned that his great-grandfather came to own 3 pieces of farmland, all confiscated from mana whenua, sharing that knowledge with his family, including his mum, Liz Shaw.
There's a whole lot of Okaroas. There's Harriet Tuta, Teresa Okaroa.
Let's call it what it was, which was people's land was stolen, and my great-grandfather was a beneficiary of that process. It's quite easy for me to drive down the South Road with Mum, as I often do when I come back, and I see a beautiful landscape, and I see farms, and I see Taranaki Maunga, and I think, geez, that's gorgeous. And I have the privilege to do that. But I rather suspect that mana whenua see a trauma escape rather than a landscape.
Richard's also been touring the country, giving talks about his book, audiences learning another side to a dark chapter in Aotearoa's history.
There was an extraordinary social, political, economic and cultural revolution, and all of it is based on land that was taken from other people.
The military occupation on Parihaka lasted for 5 years. Pacifist leaders, Te Whiti o Rongomai and Tohu Kākahi, were jailed without trial for more than a year.
It's a violent occupation, it's malevolent. It's intended to oppress and suppress the people of Parihaka. But I can't avoid the historical fact that my great-grandfather was a part of the invasion force that massed outside Parihaka on the morning of the 5th of November 1881, and more than that, he was there for 4 years as part of the occupation.
Today, Richard is meeting with Taranaki tribal historian Professor Ruakere Hond. Ruakere is supportive of Richard's work and how the book is shedding light on their painful past from a Pākehā point of view.
Looking at it from a really localised personal perspective is something that really hasn't been done.
Do you think it's brave of Richard to do this?
It's brave to take on the project itself because it is such a difficult project. There's information in the cupboard that has been hidden away for so long.
My school photos show how many Māori students there were, and most of the white students were my cousins anyway, Flemings and whoever else.
Being back on the farmland where Richard's mother grew up, knowing what they know now is unsettling.
We never thought there was any different. We just all the same. Never thought any different at all.
The irony that Andrew Gilhooly himself was stripped of his land by British colonials back in Ireland isn't lost on them.
I quite often take the view that violence begets violence, that people that grow up in certain situations sometimes act out the same violence that was acted out upon them.
An older road coming into Parihaka.
When England came to Aotearoa, they saw themselves as establishing another England, and Māori was simply in the way of that. Māori had views of asserting authority and their mana in this country, and that just wasn't part of the picture of what government wanted to achieve. So not a lot of that is surprising.
After 3 generations, Richard's family sold their land to other farmers in the 1970s.
Do you think that that land should go back to mana whenua?
I think in a perfect world it would. Forest line went away. I don't see a political project at the moment which would ensure that that happens. There have been people who have written to me and said, you should return that land, or your family should return that land.
Do you think it's easier, though, writing your history and the book when it's no longer in your families?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, no question. If I was, a one-part owner of that land and you asked me the question, shouldn't you give the land back? I would be squirming in my seat.
The celebration of a little surveyor who was very complicit in this arrangement.
Yeah.
Richard Shaw says what he can do now is start a conversation, unable to stand by and stay silent about the wrongdoings of the past.
Richard, thank you so much for coming here to share.
He's providing leadership. His story isn't always going to be met with applause, both from Māori and from non-Māori. His story is maybe denied. His story may be countered by other perspectives, which I think is good.
For the people who still live at Parihaka, it's an opportunity to recount history through a different lens.
I think the courage that Richard had in doing this work is really around how Richard perceives the way in which the country can become.
I'm not going to take your money and I'm going to sell the land to the farmer.
By going through this process, he is acting out how he wants to see this country come to terms with our shared experience. As long as that conversation continues, well then the work that Richard has done will continue to have value.
I am deeply grateful that Professor Hond, perhaps other people too, said this can go into the world. Overwhelmingly, the responses that I've had have been really constructive ones and quite positive ones, and I had not expected this. The biggest gift that they have given me is the ability to stop the forgetting and to end the silence.
Kei wareware tātou.